Father Miguel Pro, dressed in civilian clothes, was leaning against a light post on a street corner, and he was very nonchalantly lighting a cigarette. And as he was doing this, the federales, who were in hot pursuit, drove right by him. And there's a story behind it. This is how it happened. He was a wanted man. And so whenever the Mexican police would catch sight of him, they would be in hot pursuit. And he was eluding them one time after another. In this situation, he ended up diving into a cab. He was friends with the cab drivers and the bus drivers. He dove into the cab in the back seat, and the cab took off. So in the pursuit, he tells the cab driver, when you come to a corner with a light post, just don't stop, but slow down as you make the corner so that I can roll out. And he did a tuck and roll. You know, he was athletic, obviously. He did a tuck and roll. They were coming around the corner, didn't see it happen, and the cab driver sped off, right? So when the Mexican police, which often referred to as the federales, when they came in hot pursuit, they drove right by him. They just saw a civilian, you know, casually having a cigarette at the light post, and they went off after the cab driver, and of course he eluded them one more time. Father Miguel Pro's journey to sainthood, and he's blessed now, is anything but ordinary, and it will leave you inspired because of his spiritual courage and his daring. It's very exciting. I cannot wait to share all the details. So I want to give you a little bit of backstory about him. He was born in a large family in the late 19th century in Mexico, and his family, their business was mining. And as he grew up, he was known for practical jokes. He was fun-loving. If you had been in class with him, he would have been the kid who was cracking jokes and making everybody laugh. But there's an interesting story, and this goes along with many of the saints. Sometimes there was something very telling in their younger years. So he was a lovely child, easy. He was always trying to get into danger, though. I mean, one time he almost crawled out of a window as a baby. His mother caught him just in time. He was just precocious, curious, and always daring. But anyway, he had a friend. It was a woman that was a friend of the family, and she brought him his favorite fruits, and somewhere along the line they believe that there's a connection with the fruit and giving him some sort of a poisoning, or a food poisoning, and maybe it wasn't even connected at all. But anyway, after eating the fruit, he was still yet a little baby toddler. He could talk a little bit. He almost died, and for a year he was in and out of comas. He was having seizures. He couldn't speak, and there came a point when they were preparing for him to die. And this is a whole year of this with little Miguel. And at that moment, his dad just grabbed him and picked him up and put him up to a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And he cried to her and he said, "Mother, give me back my son." And what happened then? Little Miguel vomited this bloody, phlegmy, yucky, icky stuff. He just vomited all this stuff out, and then he was fine. He went on to grow and develop as any healthy young man would do. He was known for his practical jokes. Well, he actually played a joke on himself unknowingly. I'll tell you how it happened. Somehow he was away from home as a young man, and he had a girlfriend. And he composed a letter to his mother, and he composed his love letter to his girlfriend, who I don't think his parents necessarily approved of. But anyway, so he mails off the letters, and as it turns out, he put the girlfriend's letter in his mother's envelope and the mother's letter in his girlfriend's envelope, and the joke was on him. It was kind of poetic justice, and he had played some doozies on people, so he kind of deserved it, if you know what I mean. Miguel Pro does respond to his call to become a priest. He loves Jesus very much, and he gives his big yes. Catholics are persecuted to the extent that there are pictures and photos of Catholics being hung by telephone poles along the railroad line, so that anybody who was on the railroad would, as they passed a telephone pole, there'd be a body hanging there. Churches were closed, priests were shot. It was illegal to meet, illegal to receive sacraments, anything, or to gather in any way. It became terrible. And the height of it was under President Calis. Father Miguel Pro had different changes of clothes, outfits, to change into a different persona so that he could carry out his mission to bring the sacraments and take care of the needs of his people. One of them was he would dress as a mechanic. And he got in with the cab drivers and the bus drivers. And so this makes sense. He knew that cab driver earlier in the story when he dove into his cab. They were ready to help him at any time, and he would meet with them and say Mass in secret with them. And they would, be severely reprimanded, and he himself killed. Many of them would be jailed, of course, or tortured if they were caught. He also dressed as a street sweeper. And this allowed him to just move about the city unknown so that he could really see to the needs and find out what was going on with his people. He also had a getup as a wealthy businessman. That came in handy sometimes. And also as a beggar, he would dress as a beggar. And the best one of all that I think is so awesome and daring, brazen, was his police uniform. When he put that on, he would mingle right among the police and find out what they were saying about him and everything else that they were doing and who they were after. And I would like to make a recommendation before I go on further with Father Miguel Pro's story. There is a movie, it's called For Greater Glory, and it really gives a context for this time of persecution and the Cristeros War that resulted as the people were resisting this persecution. It doesn't include Father Pro's story. It actually focuses on the general who was in charge of the Cristeros War. It also includes a story about young Jose Sanchez del Rio, who actually, his story is amazing too. We'll have to do another show just for him, but he joined the Cristeros at 13, and then at 14 he was martyred. And it wasn't like he was just shot down for being one of them. He was tortured. If he would deny his faith and give up information about his company and what they were doing, then he would be set free. And he didn't do it. He endured torture and martyrdom. And that story, the movie, is about the general and this boy and the whole thing. So I've watched it about 3 times. It will leave you touched. You'll feel connected with your brothers and sisters in Christ who were suffering persecution. And although it's got very serious parts to it, it is uplifting. It is inspiring. I highly recommend it. For Greater Glory. There comes the day when Father Pro is captured, along with 2 of his brothers. And he spends the night in jail. And then the next morning, they're going to execute him and his brothers. No trial. As he's being led to his execution, one of the men who was in hot pursuit of him and helped capture him approached him. He was distraught, tears in his eyes, crying, begging for Father Pro's forgiveness because he knows what's going to happen and he knows he had a hand in it and he's just guilty. And Father Pro puts his arms around the sobbing man and says, I forgive you. And not only that, I thank you. And then he goes on to be the first one to be executed. He's given a last wish, and that last wish is to be able to kneel and say a prayer. So he kneels down, he says a prayer, and then he gets up and he faces the firing squad. And of course, he's in the civilian clothes that they captured him in. But we've got the photos of him. He stands there. He stretches out his arms in the form of the cross. He refuses the blindfold. He wants to see. He's not going to do the blindfold. And he shouts out, "Viva Cristo Rey," which means long live Christ the King. And then they fire the shots. He falls to the ground. He's really not quite dead. And so one of the federales walks up and shoots him in the head to finish him off. One of the two brothers is executed next. He's self-possessed. He meets his martyrdom head on. And the third brother, before they execute him, there's a phone call that's made that stops that last execution. And he ends up being exiled to the United States. There is this law, and it was a hefty law. We know what the persecution was like. There's a law that you may not gather, for a funeral or any religious rite. And when they have the funeral, it's estimated that somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 people come out for it. There's 500 cars. It's a huge big deal in defiance of the government. And the pictures taken go out, even though President Kalis rescinds it. Don't send the pictures. Don't spread this news about the execution and the martyrdom of Father Pro. It goes out because President Kalis realizes it's not having the effect he wanted. He wanted it to bring the people down. And what it did was it bolstered them in their faith. And they were in great defiance, and they continued their resistance of the persecution as a result. We have some of Father Miguel Pro's writing shortly before he was martyred. And they're from Ann Ball's book, Blessed Miguel Pro. Blessed Miguel Pro had a devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and also to the Virgin of Sorrows. And that's obvious in this writing about her. For my life, I covet the jeers and mockery of Calvary, the slow agony of your Son, the contempt, the infamy of his cross. I wish to stand at your side, most sorrowful Virgin, strengthening my spirit with your tears, consummating my sacrifice with your martyrdom, sustaining my heart with your solitude, loving my God and your God with the immolation of my being. Blessed Miguel Pro, pray for us.